Good evening, and welcome to Beanbon's fanfiction reading. It's a working title. If you have any suggestions, please drop them in the comments. I sorely need help. Since this is the first episode, you don't know. What was that feedback? Anyway, I don't really edit this at all. I will just be recording as I read, and if I mess up a word or a sentence, I'll just go back and fix it. You'll figure it out eventually. Imagine this is your older or younger sister just sitting at the bottom of your bed reading you fanfiction she found online that she thought was interesting. So this is from Archive of Your Own, Devils in the Details by SoulsForYourSoup. You can also find this on Wattpad by the same author, different name, and their name on Wattpad is A Mouse with a Muffin. So on Wattpad, Mouse with Muffin, Archive of Your Own, Soup for Your Soul. Or sorry, Souls for Your Soup. Yes, Souls for Your Soup, Devils in the Details, Archive of Your Own. Okay. Summary. After the fiasco that was the end of the Triwizard Tournament, Harry was sent back to the Dursleys for the summer holidays. Unfortunately for Harry, it was much the same, heat stroke here, bruising there, and a little starvation all around. Left to stew in his juices away from the wizarding world, Harry and his... Oh, see, I've already messed up. Okay. Left to stew in his juices away from the wizarding world and his friends, Harry finally reaches the end of his, frankly, too long rope. To say the least, he starts off in a flaming fashion and finds himself facing a few cold-blooded truths. Love upon heart. Notes. Please excuse my random lore dumping, but I am unashamed. I am sort of going for a 2000s fanfic.net vibe with, the whole creature thing, inheritance, politics, and lore. Seemed fun. Let's just see how it goes. Smiley face. Chapter 1. Why go up if you can tear it to the ground? Summary. Potter and Dursley bonding time. Hearts will bleed. But will they be yours? For notes, see the end of chapter. Harry hadn't exactly known what to expect when he'd come back to the Dursleys for the summer holiday, after how the Weasleys had fantastically saved him from his relatives last summer. At the time, it'd been absolutely brilliant. The looks on all their faces, spectacular. Dudders with a tongue fat as he was, fantastic. Being able to leave and not face the wrath of Vernon, amazing. The thing about his relatives is that they aren't ones to forgive and forget, or to live and let live. No. They can hold on to grudges until they die. Harry was quickly reminded of this as soon as he stepped off the train. It ran over him like a glass of cold water, down his neck. God, he never should have come back to number 4 Privet Drive. He knew he should have jumped onto a random muggle train and gallivanted off to Spain or something. The Dursleys had sat at home, festering, all school year, remembering and picking apart everything the freaks did at their home, did to their home. And to their poor, sweet Dudders. The mess in Aunt Petunia's immaculate home? It will never be the same again. It was cleaned up as though the Weasleys had never even been in Little Winging, but don't try telling Aunt Petunia that. Not now that her home has been infected with even more freakishness than her freak of a nephew. Harry really should have train hopped his way to some small village of 73 people in the countryside of Spain somewhere. The weather was probably more manageable there. They were in the middle of a heat wave. Harry was certain he had only stopped sweating because he was too dehydrated to have any water to spare. His only consolation was that Aunt Petunia didn't have him in the garden today, after spending the entirety of yesterday out weeding, pruning, and getting sunburnt to hell, and miraculously, somehow, getting heat stroke. He wasn't outside slowly dying, but he was inside his own personal sauna. A beautiful dark little hole in the wall. He was sure the spiders had moved on to the cooler parts of this cupboard. Not like Harry could, though. No, he was much too big to shift around anymore. Although, he never thought he would be thankful for his smaller than average frame until now. He had no idea how much he would come to appreciate his stunted growth. If he had been Ron's size, hell, even Hermione's size, he was sure he would have given himself a truly fantastic concussion by the end of now on the bottom of the stairs above his head. He was slowly getting used to it again. When he was younger, he never even had to think about where he was. His body just remembered. But since he is a bit bigger than last time, granted not by much, he had to readjust. There was no need to make himself any worse. His first night back in his room, he had managed to give himself quite the bruise on his elbow from flailing in his sleep. It was a quick and sudden reminder of why he shouldn't move so much in his sleep. He just didn't have the wiggle room for it. Harry had been home for less than a fortnight, and was sorely regretting his existence. Was he being slightly melodramatic? Yes, but Harry felt he was entitled to a little melodramatics. After the fiasco that was last year's grand departure, Harry had been re-gifted his old room. He hadn't quite been expecting that. But to return, maybe a return to the bars of his window, but he hadn't been expecting to be relocated to the cupboard under the stairs. He had been hoping, in the deepest parts of his heart, that the Weasleys may have managed to terrify his relatives into leaving him alone, but alas, when does something Harry wants ever turn out like he thinks it should? The cosmos just hadn't been aligned right when he was conceived, he supposed. No, his relatives had taken to how the Weasleys acted as a sign that what they had started with Harry had worked to some degree or other. So they continued to the next phase of getting the freakishness out of their nephew. Vernon had managed to get a hold of Harry's wand and snapped it into little itty-bitty pieces. They dumped Harry's trunk up in the attic and left Hedwig in the great wide world. Harry had been returned to his cupboard and his chores, and his separate meals, or lack thereof. The lock that kept Dudley out of the cupboards and the fridge now kept Harry out as well. He couldn't even sneak into the kitchen during the night like he did when he was younger. With Dudley's diet, the scraps Harry managed to get were small slices of grapefruit or bits of salad, or sometimes, if he was lucky, he might even manage to get a dinner roll. Harry might manage a chunk of butter in the bun if Petunia's not looking. Not that a piece of fat is particularly appetizing, but Harry will take what he can get. Harry shifted the shoulder he was laying on and stifled a groan, wincing. He wasn't entirely sure what was wrong with it, but it certainly did not feel great. It could have been from any number of things. It's not like Harry could do anything about it if he managed to figure out what it was. The best he could do is try not to use it too much. One thing about being locked in his cupboard was that it gave him plenty of time to think. Heaps and heaps of time to agonize over Cedric's death, and the return of Voldemort, and Moody, and the Triwizard Cup, and Sirius, and his friends, who hadn't even tried to write or find out why Harry wasn't writing. At this point, Harry was really hoping that Hedwig was at the Burrow, or in Barcelona somewhere. But considering his track record of things going how he wants them, he just hopes Hedwig is at least safe. He should never have let Cedric take the cup with him. He should have been a selfish arsehole and taken it for himself. That was what the rules wanted him to do. That's what Cedric wanted him to do. But Harry insisted, may as well play the incorruptible young hero, share the win. Harry should have never let Cedric come close to the centre of the maze. He should have left him the first time he saved Cedric. At least he would have been alive now. A bit sore, perhaps, but alive. Harry was sure he'd never let himself forgive and forget that. He supposed he wasn't much different from his relatives as he thought. Maybe that's why he felt so blasé about his return to the top hits of his childhood. On some level, it felt as though Harry was getting his just desserts for his part in Cedric's death. If he hadn't wanted to be the bigger person, Cedric would still be alive and snogging Cho. The decisions Harry made had killed Cedric. He needed to be punished for that. It wasn't like anyone else was going to do it. Why not let his relatives? They'd no problem giving Harry a slap up the side of the head, as long as they don't find out he deserves it for something other than being a freak. The days passed slowly. At first, Harry was only doing the usual chores and cooking. Then he started getting locked up in his cupboard again without food or water, only being let out to use the bathroom once a day, for his cheek or for his lazy work ethic, of course. As the days turned into weeks, Vernon started to dip into the liqueur to deal with Petunia and Dudley during the heat wave, and to deal with the increasing amount of problems arising at Grunnings. Harry, unfortunately, became very versed in where Dudley inherited his boxing abilities, and it wasn't from his horsey mother. It didn't happen all that often at first, but when it did, Harry felt it until the next time. Then it started to happen more and more often. Harry began to find it difficult to complete his chores, which resulted in more cupboard and Vernon bonding time, which in turn made his chores worse, and the cycle continued. His small body once again became a patchwork of bones and bruises. Harry mostly escaped it into his mind these days, which wasn't filled with much, to be totally honest. His sunburn was mostly healed, though, and he was mildly pleased about that. With the lack of food or water, Harry found his healing to be absolutely abysmal. His magic ended up having to take over, fueling his body. He could feel how low his magical core was. His body was draining it by just continuing to breathe. He needed to siphon the energy to heal his more severe injuries, and to keep himself from passing out from the lack of nutrition and hydration. It made Harry think about how much he must have used his magic to heal himself when he was younger. If he had only been back barely a month, and his core was already drained. Harry was so broken in so many ways that he stopped feeling anything at all, numb to the bone. He lay in the same position as he had landed in, He lay in the same position he had landed in when he was tossed in the cupboard a few hours ago. His back was on fire when his body ached like an abscessed tooth. He had found out what Vernon had done to Hedwig, his beautiful girl. She did not fly off to Barcelona, or anywhere for that matter. He does not regret breaking his uncle's nose in the slightest to avenge his owl. No matter how much his back hurt now, he could not help but feel satisfaction in the pain. Harry found himself in the position of finding that if he ever sees another grapefruit, he's going to rip out his own tongue and shove it down the throat of whoever owns the fruit. Harry swore to God and all things holy that getting a cold in the middle of summer should be written down as an eternal sin. Harry wasn't even sure where he would have caught one. He stayed on the Dursleys' property. None of the rest of them have got the slightest bit sick. The timing, though, couldn't have been more perfect. Just in time for Vernon to have a company party at the Dursleys' residence as a thank you for all their hard work during these turbulent times at Grunnings. Harry was just glad Dobby wouldn't come in and stop Harry from going to Hogwarts and dropping the pudding on the head of Vernon's boss's wife. Harry touched the wood bottom of the stairs over his head with his knuckles. He ignored the grief his body gave him for it. Harry wasn't about to risk anything, even remotely similar, happening tonight. He had received the same instructions as when he was 12. Make no noise and pretend he doesn't exist. Easy enough. That's what he normally does. But that's also what he thought last time. It was this cold that worried him, though. One cough or sniffle and it would all be over. At this point, his magic was stretched so thin he wasn't even sure he'd be able to heal anything. So if Vernon got a bit too drunk or hit him in the right spot, Harry might be in some serious hot water. As it is, he'd already been fighting the tickle in the back of his throat for the better part of an hour. Harry was sure that Vernon's Japanese golfer joke was no more funny than when he told it 3 years ago. At least, this time, Harry didn't ruin the punchline with Dobby hitting himself on Harry's wall. The joke wasn't even that clever or well thought out, but the Grunnings crowd must have been made up of Vernons, or they were too terrified not to laugh, because the joke received an uproarious reception. Harry had been secretly hoping that the punchline would fall flat, out of spite for Vernon, reusing a joke from 3 years ago. Harry lasted until pudding again, before he, yet again, ruined Vernon's work at dinner. If you were to ask him later, Harry would swear on his parents' graves that he has never sneezed louder, nor will he ever sneeze as loud again. It was a sneeze of making God's robes sway, and was loud enough to wake a giant, and was filled with phlegm, and was the build-up of 3 days without sneezing. Harry was sure that the Whomping Willow herself could hear his sneeze all the way in Scotland. The pressure release left Harry with a pounding headache that bounced around his skull before settling behind his eyes. He stifled a moan and pinched the bridge of his nose. The silence that echoed back from the sitting room was even more deafening than the sneeze had been ricocheting off the walls of the cupboard. "What was that, Mr. Dursley?" Harry could hear one of the guests break the spell.
What? Oh, it must have been one of the neighbours' cats."
"Are you sure? It sounded an awful lot like a sneeze."
"A sneeze!" Vernon cried incredulously. "Of course not. We're all here. Dudders, why don't you take a look round and see?"
A thunderous waddle answered. Harry felt the floor vibrate harsher and harsher as his wail of a cousin trampled closer and closer to Harry's cupboard. Dudley flicked open the grate on the door and peered his enormous pudgy face down at Harry, squinting his little pig eyes. "You hear that, freak? You're fucking dead. Dead." Harry lifted up one hand and gave his cousin a perfect view of Harry's favourite finger. Dudley frowned and tilted his head to the side. "Fuck you. If my dad doesn't get you, I'm gonna," he whispered harshly, spittle flying. He followed his father's example and turned a lovely shade of Prusse. Harry gave his cousin a savage grin. "Sure. If you can catch me, Big D." Dudley pounded a meaty fist on the door of the cupboard, shaking the staircase. "Fucking dead," he muttered as he tromped back to the sitting room.
"Yeah, just some stupid cat," Dudley called out to the group.
Harry heard the armchair moan as his cousin hunkered into it once again. "Thank you, Duddykins," Aunt Petunia said in a tight voice, and the night continued. Harry sat in the cupboard as the minutes passed somehow too slow and far too quickly. He sat in a purgatorial state of agony and bliss, both satisfied and hating himself. He half hoped for the time to move faster, and for it to freeze and never start again. His stomach tingled as though little ants were crawling around his intestines and stomach lining, although his mind was numb, completely blank. He wasn't entirely sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing yet. It was hours of drawn-out torment before the Grunnings office left, and Vernon came to fetch Harry. It was an exciting few minutes where Harry sat leaning against the wall in the hall, while Vernon stared at him, getting increasingly redder and redder. As he inspected his nephew, Harry was surprised he managed to get quite that red before turning purple. His walrus moustache quivered and shook like a suffocating squirrel. Harry could smell the alcohol oozing from his uncle's pores. Harry wasn't sure what Aunt Petunia put in the punch, but he was sure no one cared what the pudding tasted like by the time it came around. Vernon's black, beady eyes were glazed and unfocused as they glared into Harry's glassy green ones. Dudley was standing at the bottom of the staircase and was vibrating in anticipation. The most exercise Harry was sure his cousin had had in years. His aunt, on the other hand, was steadily calm, peering down at him from her pinched face. She was leaning against the door frame, gently with her arms crossed tightly across her body.
Boy, we have put up with you and your freakishness for far too long. We clothed you, we fed you, gave you a roof. We've never got an inch of gratitude from you, or your kind. Spittle flew from his mouth and got caught in his mustache. Your breathing is bringing down the quality of this neighbourhood. He paused to look at his wife for a moment. She gave them all a sharp nod. And we let you into our home, out of the goodness of our hearts, and all you can do is disrespect our house and taint our daughters with your freakishness. You ruined our party. You ruined our home. You ruined everything you touch. Vernon waved one of his large, saucer-like fingers in Harry's face. Not any more. We are going to get rid of you like we did that blasted bird of yours. Not any more. Vernon's face got closer and closer to Harry's with every word. His breath fanned across Harry's face, burning his eyes from the sour smell of alcohol. I told you, Potter. Dad's gonna get you so bad. That was a really bad accent. Ignore it. Okay. Dudley cried out with a childish delight. Harry doubted he'd managed to survive this half as well as he would have even 1 week ago. His magical core was at its limits. As tried to keep his organs from failing, if any of the injuries he gets from this are even mildly severe, it could be the long and not too sudden end of the boy who lived. Because it would be long and slow. His core would keep him alive, if barely, but still alive and not getting any better. Harry wasn't sure if he wanted his uncle to use the belt or his fists. The fist had a broader surface area, so much more distribution of force. But the belt, Harry was more used to. A smaller area, and it was used on the back and not his stomach, where his soft organs were. It was a real toss-up as to which one he was hoping for. Harry had miscalculated. His uncle had decided to go with his feet. Harry was on the receiving end of a swift kick to the chest. He coughed violently as his chest spasmed, the strike crushing his ribs on both sides, the wall, and his uncle's monstrous foot. And another kick, and another, into his stomach and chest. Harry did his best to suppress any noise, but his ribs didn't listen. They made a resounding crack. The air left Harry's lungs. He gasped, sliding to his side on the floor. Dudley made a captivated sound that encouraged his intoxicated father. Vernon gave a satisfied grunt at Harry's pain-filled face. Harry watched through squinted eyes as his uncle unbuckled his belt and slipped it from his pants loops. He had thought his uncle would stop after he'd broken something. Harry was wrong. The belt rained down on his side with a crack and a snap. And that is halfway through chapter 1. If I keep going, this video will be about an hour, so I shall finish the first chapter next week, so please come back for the rest of the chapter. Currently there are 4 chapters out. They update every Wednesday on Archive of Your Own, and I think
they also update on the same schedule on Wattpad. It might be a day later, I'm not sure, but if you'd like to read ahead of me, you're more than welcome to. And please feel free to leave them a comment telling them what you think of their story. You're also welcome to leave a comment on my channel, my video. I know the accent is kind of bad, but I'm learning, and I figured since it's Harry Potter, I should try to have a British accent. Like an RP mixed with a Cockney. It's not great, I will admit. Thank you all for listening, and have a good night. And this has been Bean Bun's fanfiction reading. Please help me find a different title that actually has a ring to it, because that just sounds sad. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and have a good night.